When the SWAT team kicked down the door at 3:47 a.m., they expected to find a drug dealer. Instead, they found Captain Robert Hayes, the internal affairs officer who would be investigating their next misconduct case.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and a comment before we start to learn more about what happened.
The radio crackled to life in the pre-dawn darkness. All units, Operation Night Sweep is a go. Target residence, 1247 Maple Street. Suspect is armed and extremely dangerous. Captain Robert Hayes was deep in sleep when the sound started. First, the rumble of heavy engines, then voices, too many voices, right outside his bedroom window. 23 years on the force had taught him to recognize the sound of tactical vehicles, but he never expected to hear them parked in his own driveway. He sat up in bed, checking his phone. 3:46 a.m. His wife, Sarah, stirred beside him, mumbling something about the neighbors. But Hayes knew this wasn't neighbors. The engine sounds were too coordinated, too purposeful. This was a police operation, and it was happening at his house. Hayes grabbed his service weapon from the nightstand, muscle memory kicking in. As head of internal affairs for the past 8 years, he'd investigated dozens of botched raids, wrongful entries, and constitutional violations. He knew the protocols better than anyone. He also knew how badly they could go wrong. The voices outside grew louder. Hayes could make out fragments. Secure the perimeter. Back door covered. Suspect vehicle confirmed. His blood ran cold. They weren't here by accident. Someone had given them his address. Bob? Sarah was awake now, hearing the commotion. What's happening? Before he could answer, the front door exploded inward. Police! Search warrant! Get on the ground now! Combat boots thundered across his hardwood floors. Tactical flashlights cut through the darkness like searchlights. Hayes raised his hands instinctively, his service weapon still in his grip, a decision that would escalate everything in the next 3 seconds. Armed suspect, weapon visible! The bedroom door burst open. 3 SWAT officers in full gear, automatic weapons trained on Hayes and his terrified wife. The red laser dots danced across their chests like deadly fireflies. Drop the weapon! Drop it now! Hayes slowly placed his service pistol on the nightstand. I'm a police officer. Badge number 847, Internal Affairs Division. The lead officer, Hayes could see Martinez on his tactical vest, didn't lower his weapon. Shut up and get on the ground, hands behind your head. This was already a textbook violation, failure to verify credentials, excessive force during apprehension. Hayes cataloged each mistake as it happened, knowing he'd be writing reports about this, if he survived it. Sarah was crying now, hands shaking as she complied with the shouted commands. Hayes felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He'd seen too many situations escalate because someone couldn't control their emotions. Face down, do not move. The carpet was rough against his cheek. Hayes could hear his house being torn apart downstairs, furniture overturned, drawers dumped, systematic destruction in the name of a search warrant. A warrant that had his address on it. A warrant that was completely, catastrophically wrong. Officer Martinez zip-tied Hayes's hands behind his back, yanking the plastic restraints tight enough to cut circulation. Another violation. Excessive restraint of a compliant suspect. What's your name? Martinez demanded. Captain Robert Hayes, Internal Affairs Division, Badge 847. Right. And I'm the commissioner. Save it for someone who gives a damn. The search was aggressive and thorough. Hayes listened from the bedroom floor as his home was systematically violated. Books thrown from shelves, kitchen cabinets emptied. His home office, the one where he'd written dozens of misconduct reports, being turned inside out. Officer Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. Martinez, we got a problem. This house is too clean. No drugs, no weapons cache, no criminal activity. Just normal family stuff. Martinez wasn't interested in facts that contradicted the warrant. Keep looking. Intelligence said this was the place. Intelligence was wrong, Hayes said quietly. Martinez kicked Hayes' shoulder, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but hard enough to make a point. Nobody asked you, dealer boy. Dealer boy. Hayes almost laughed. The irony was suffocating. The man calling him a drug dealer had just committed assault on a superior officer. Hayes made mental note number 7 of the violations he was witnessing. Sir, Rodriguez tried again. His ID says Robert Hayes. Police officer. Fake ID. These dealers get sophisticated fake credentials now. Don't let him mess with your head. The stupidity was breathtaking. Hayes had seen this before. Officers so committed to their initial assumption that they ignored evidence contradicting it. Confirmation bias in tactical gear, destroying an innocent family's home. Sarah was allowed to sit on the edge of the bed, but she wasn't allowed to speak. Every time she tried to explain who her husband was, Martinez told her to shut up or join him on the floor. Another violation, intimidation of a witness. The search continued for 45 minutes. 45 minutes of his home being destroyed based on a warrant that should never have been issued. Hayes knew the address they really wanted. 1274 Maple Street, 7 houses down. The house with the broken mailbox and the pit bull in the yard. The house where Marcus Devil Washington actually lived. But pointing out their mistake would mean admitting he knew about their operation, which would raise questions about how Internal Affairs had advanced knowledge of tactical raids. A political minefield he couldn't navigate while zip-tied on his bedroom floor. Officer Thompson joined the bedroom conference. Martinez, we need to talk. This guy's service weapon is registered to the police department. His badge looks real, and I found something downstairs. What kind of something? Commendation letters. From the commissioner, addressed to Captain Robert Hayes, Internal Affairs. Martinez looked at the letters like they were written in a foreign language. Hayes watched the man's face cycle through confusion, doubt, and finally, the beginning of panic. Could be forgeries. All of them. Martinez, look at this house. Look at these people. This isn't a drug dealer's operation. The doubt was spreading. Hayes could see it in their body language, the weapons lowering slightly, the aggressive posture softening into uncertainty. But Martinez wasn't ready to admit the magnitude of their mistake. We execute the warrant as written. If there's been a mistake, the courts will sort it out. That's when Hayes spoke up. Officer Martinez, what's your badge number? Shut up. Because when I write my report, and I will be writing a very detailed report, I want to make sure I spell your name correctly. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Hayes watched Martinez's face cycle through recognition, disbelief, and pure terror as the implications hit him. Your report? Martinez's voice had changed. Less commanding, more questioning. I'm Captain Robert Hayes, Internal Affairs Division, badge number 847, the division that investigates police misconduct. Hayes kept his voice level, professional. And in the last hour, I've witnessed approximately 15 separate violations of department protocol, civilian rights, and constitutional law. Rodriguez stepped backward. Thompson put his weapon on safe, but Martinez wasn't ready to surrender. You're lying, trying to intimidate us because you got caught. Call it in, Hayes said simply. Radio dispatch. Ask them to run badge number 847. Ask them what division Captain Robert Hayes works for. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Hayes could hear his neighbors talking outside. The whole street was awake now, watching police cars and tactical vehicles surrounding the Internal Affairs captain's house. The political ramifications were already spreading beyond control. Finally, Thompson made the call. Dispatch, this is Thompson, Unit 47. Need you to run a badge verification. Number 847, name Robert Hayes. The radio crackled back almost immediately. Unit 47, badge 847, belongs to Captain Robert Hayes, Internal Affairs Division. He's your department's IA commander. Why are you asking? The color drained from Martinez's face. Rodriguez sat down heavily on Hayes' dresser. Thompson closed his eyes and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Dispatch, Thompson tried again. What address do we have on file for Captain Hayes? 1247 Maple Street. Why? Is there a problem? Martinez looked at the warrant in his hand, then at Hayes on the floor, then back at the warrant. The paper was shaking. We're at 1247 Maple Street, Thompson said quietly into his radio. Then you're at Captain Hayes' residence. Again, why are you asking these questions? Nobody answered. Nobody could answer. They'd just executed a drug raid on the home of the man who would investigate their next misconduct case. They'd zip-tied him, kicked him, insulted him, and destroyed his house while his wife watched in terror. Martinez finally found his voice. Cut him loose. Sir, cut him loose right now. Thompson scrambled to find wire cutters. Hayes felt the zip ties fall away, circulation returning to his hands in painful stages. He sat up slowly, deliberately, taking time to assess the damage to his wrists, evidence of excessive restraint. Captain Hayes, Martinez's voice was pleading now. There's been a mistake. The warrant was for 1274 Maple Street, Hayes finished. 7 houses down, where Marcus Washington lives. The address you should have double-checked before kicking in doors. Martinez looked like he was about to be sick. How did you? Because it's my job to know about high-risk warrants that might generate misconduct complaints. Because I review tactical operations for constitutional violations. Because investigating police mistakes is literally what I do for a living. Hayes stood up, straightening his pajamas with as much dignity as he could manage. His house was destroyed. His wife was traumatized. His neighbors had watched him get arrested like a common criminal. And 3 officers had just committed career-ending violations of department policy. The question, Hayes continued, is what we do about this situation. Officer Rodriguez was the first to break. Captain, we didn't know. The warrant clearly said. The warrant said 1247 Maple Street. This is 1247 Maple Street. The mistake wasn't in reading the address. The mistake was in getting the warrant issued for the wrong address in the first place. Hayes walked to his bedroom window and looked out at the tactical circus in his front yard. News crews were already arriving. Someone had called the media about the SWAT raid in the quiet residential neighborhood. This was about to become a public relations nightmare for the entire department. Who requested this warrant? Hayes asked. Martinez was sweating now, despite the cool morning air. Detective Morrison from Narcotics. Hayes knew Morrison. Aggressive, ambitious, cutting corners to boost his arrest statistics. Hayes had been building a file on Morrison for months, waiting for him to make a mistake big enough to warrant formal charges. Congratulations, Detective Morrison. You just handed me that mistake. Let me explain what happens next, Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of 8 years investigating police misconduct. You're going to call your supervisor and explain that you executed a warrant on the wrong house. You're going to document every violation that occurred during this raid. And you're going to pray that I'm feeling generous when I write my report. Captain, Thompson said quietly, what can we do to make this right? It was the right question asked 8 violations too late. Hayes looked at his wife, still sitting on the edge of their bed, still shaking from an hour of terror. He looked at his destroyed home, his scattered belongings, his life turned upside down by police incompetence. First, you're going to help me clean up this mess. All of it. Every book, every drawer, every piece of furniture you overturned. You're going to put my house back exactly the way you found it. The three officers nodded eagerly. Second, you're going to escort my wife and me to a hotel while our locks are replaced and our security system is repaired. The department is paying for that. More nodding. Third, you're going to write the most honest, detailed incident reports of your careers. Every mistake, every violation, every moment where you failed to follow proper procedure. Because if I find discrepancies between your reports and what I witnessed, things will get much worse for all of you. Martinez looked desperate. And then? Hayes considered his options. He could destroy these officers' careers with a single report. He could turn this into a department-wide scandal about tactical unit overreach. He could make this a career-defining case that would follow Martinez, Rodriguez, and Thompson for the rest of their time on the force. Or he could turn it into a teaching moment. Then we use this as an example, training scenario for every tactical unit in the department. What happens when you don't verify your intelligence, don't double-check your addresses, and don't follow proper identification procedures? The relief on their faces was palpable, but Hayes wasn't finished. But understand this, I will be watching all three of you very carefully from now on. Any future violations, any complaints against you, any suggestion that you haven't learned from this mistake? And I will remember this morning. I will remember how you treated me and my wife. And I will use every tool at my disposal to ensure you never make another mistake like this again. The cleanup took 4 hours. 4 hours of SWAT officers carefully replacing books on shelves, reorganizing kitchen cabinets, and apologizing to Hayes's neighbors for the 4 a.m. disturbance. Hayes documented everything with his phone camera, evidence of their cooperation, but also insurance against future retaliation. Detective Morrison arrived at 9 a.m., expecting to take credit for a major drug bust. Instead, he found his tactical team helping the internal affairs captain repair his front door. The conversation between Morrison and Hayes was brief, professional, and devastating for Morrison's career prospects. Detective, your warrant application contained false information, inadequate intelligence verification, and resulted in the violation of a police officer's constitutional rights. You have 48 hours to provide a written explanation of your investigative process, or I'll be recommending formal charges. Morrison left without saying a word. By noon, his resignation letter was on the commissioner's desk. The media coverage was surprisingly positive. Instead of "Police Raid Wrong House," the headlines read, "Internal Affairs Captain Uses Mistaken Raid as Teaching Opportunity." Hayes had turned a potential scandal into a story about accountability and professional growth. But the real changes happened in the weeks that followed. Warrant verification procedures were strengthened. Tactical teams received additional constitutional law training. Address verification became a mandatory step in all high-risk operations, and Hayes found himself with more influence than ever before. 3 months later, Martinez, Rodriguez, and Thompson were among the department's most careful officers. They double-checked everything, followed every protocol, and treated every citizen encounter as if they were being watched by internal affairs, because they knew they were. Hayes kept his word about using the incident as a training scenario. Every new tactical officer now heard the story of the wrong address raid, told in Hayes' calm, professional voice. When you kick down a door, you better be absolutely certain it's the right door, because the person on the other side might be the person who decides your future with this department. The house on Maple Street was quiet again, but Hayes never slept quite as soundly. Sarah had moved to the guest bedroom. She said the master bedroom still felt violated. They'd talked about moving, but Hayes refused to let the mistake drive him from his home. Instead, he'd installed better locks, upgraded the security system, and kept his service weapon closer than ever. Because 23 years on the force had taught him something else. Mistakes have a way of repeating themselves, and next time he wanted to be ready. The real victory wasn't in the disciplinary actions or the policy changes. It was in the knowledge that 3 officers had learned to be better cops because of one terrible morning. That Detective Morrison's shortcuts had been exposed before he could violate more citizens' rights. That the department's tactical procedures were stronger because of a single wrong address. Sometimes the best teaching moments come from the worst mistakes. And sometimes the teacher doesn't choose to be in the classroom. The classroom comes to him at 3:47 in the morning, through his front door with combat boots and tactical weapons. Captain Robert Hayes had spent 8 years investigating police misconduct. Now he'd experienced it firsthand, and he'd use that experience to make sure fewer families would go through what his family endured that morning. That was power. Real power. The power to turn a violation into a victory, a mistake into a lesson, and a wrong address into the right lesson for an entire department. Every moment had the power to change everything, even the moments that started at the wrong house.